Everyone knows Brazil is by far the biggest Latin American country, both in terms of size and population. I mean, Brazil is basically a continent. It is the 5th largest country in the world and the 7th most populous. And naturally, well, with that size, it also ranks among the world's largest economies, currently sitting at number 10. But well, if size alone determined a country's success, well then, Russia would be the best place to live on Earth, right? And well, that's not actually the case. But yes, Brazil is indeed a huge country, and many Brazilians themselves often refer to it as the country of the future. Now, is that really true? Is Brazil actually the country of the future? Well, honestly, I don't think so. Yes, Brazil has a lot of natural resources, but you know, that's not what makes a country rich. In fact, Brazil has made such bad economic decisions over the last few decades that today, many Brazilians are actually migrating to Paraguay, a country that's actually poorer than Brazil. A country that 150 years ago was actually destroyed by Brazil in the Paraguayan War. In fact, many Brazilians actually think of Paraguay as a country still living in the Stone Ages, very poor with nothing special. So the question is, why are there so many Brazilians going to Paraguay? That's what we'll discuss today. Our topic will be how Brazil is getting beaten by Paraguay. Because it is. That's what we are going to understand in 8 key points. But yes, in my view, against all odds, Paraguay is actually the country of the future. And it all starts with the economic mindset. You see, while Brazil tends to view the state as the main driver of economic activity, Paraguay has embraced a different approach, a liberal position. So while Brazil concentrates a large share of capital allocation decisions in the hands of the government, which often leads to higher taxes, higher debt, and lower economic efficiency, Paraguay, on the other hand, has moved in the opposite direction. And Paraguay's idea is quite simple: to decentralize, letting businesses and individuals themselves develop the country. So while Brazil continues to burden its population with high taxes and excessive regulation, Paraguay, on the other hand, is offering a much more business-friendly environment in an effort to attract investments and entrepreneurs. And that's where the difference actually begins, in the economic mindset. And well, different mindsets lead to different outcomes. And those differences can already be seen today. For example, here's our first key point. Paraguay has already investment-grade status. Yeah, that's true. As we can see here, both S&P and Moody's recently upgraded Paraguay to investment grade, reflecting the country's economic progress and improving fundamentals. Now, let's compare that to Brazil. In Brazil, we see a very different picture. For example, Paraguay's S&P credit rating currently stands at BBB negative, while Brazil remains 2 levels behind. And that difference may seem small at first glance, but it actually says a lot about how international investors perceive the risk profile of each country. But you see, Paraguay's investment grade didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen overnight. It was earned. For example, let's take a look at the country's fiscal deficit at just 1.7% of GDP. And that's actually our second key point. Paraguay has a much better financial health than Brazil. Now, sure, a deficit of 1.7% is still a deficit, but the trend is moving in the right direction, as we can see here. And well, that's what really matters in the end, right? Now, let's compare that to Brazil. As we can see here, Brazil's fiscal deficit currently stands at 8.3% of GDP. In other words, Brazil's deficit is almost 5 times larger than Paraguay's. Well, I think that now everyone understands why Paraguay has a better credit score than Brazil. And you see, over time, numbers like these tend to have major consequences for growth, inflation, and investor confidence. So my point is, that's not something that you can ignore. Now, our third key point is debt. Yes, debt. You see, Paraguay's debt to GDP ratio stands at only 38%, as we can see here, though it is indeed going up. But still, Paraguay's debt is certainly much smaller than Brazil's, which is at 80%. So another very big difference here. Now, our fourth key point is interest rates. You see, the most important law in the investment world is this: the higher the risk, the higher the return must be, right? So if Brazil has much more debt, and if it also spends much more in relation to what it makes, right? Well then, of course, Brazil is a riskier play when compared to Paraguay. And that higher risk is reflected in the country's interest rates. So while interest rates in Brazil stand at roughly 15%, that's a crazy number, okay? But while in Brazil interest rates stand at 15%, in Paraguay, on the other hand, that number is at only 5.5%, as we can see here. It's no surprise that roughly 80% of the Brazilian population is in debt and that interest payments consume most of the country's budget, as we see here in this image. Besides, high interest rates are also the main reason why more companies than ever before in Brazil's recent history are currently under judicial recovery. Now, our fifth key point is the Paraguayan currency, the Guarani. As you might expect, given Paraguay's much stronger fiscal position, it is no surprise that the Paraguayan Guarani, the Paraguayan currency, has significantly outperformed the Brazilian real over the past 5 years. I mean, as we can see here, while the dollar in Brazil has dropped only 0.3% during that period, in Paraguay, the dollar has dropped 11%. In other words, Paraguay's Guarani has appreciated more than the Brazilian real in relation to the dollar. And that's quite important. After all, a stronger currency means more purchasing power for the population. And by the way, here's my prediction. I think the Paraguayan Guarani, the Paraguayan currency, could end up being one of the best performing currencies over the next few years, and perhaps even over the next few decades. Now, why do I say that, right? Because Paraguay, as we've seen, is far less leveraged than most countries around the world. And on top of that, on top of the better fiscal situation, right, I also believe Paraguay is going to attract a tremendous amount of capital in the years ahead, partially because of its business-friendly tax system, yeah, that's true, but also because of the nearshoring trends we are seeing around the world. In case you're not aware, more and more companies are looking to reduce their dependence on the Asia-Pacific region, bringing production closer to their end markets. And in my view, Latin America stands to benefit a lot from that shift. And I believe Paraguay could be one of the biggest winners here. And well, with more capital flowing into the country, local currency tends to appreciate as well. So that's why I believe the Paraguayan Guarani, the Paraguayan currency, could outperform most currencies over the coming years, for everyone's surprise. And now, we finally reached the sixth reason why Paraguay is outperforming Brazil, which is Paraguayan's tax system. That's the reason why I believe so much capital will flow into Paraguay, because their tax system is simply phenomenal. In fact, I think it's reasonable to argue that Paraguay's tax system might be one of the most attractive systems in the world, okay? And you know, capital simply tends to flow where it is treated best. But okay, how does Paraguay's tax system work? So, first, Paraguay operates under a territorial tax system, which means that you don't pay any taxes on your foreign investments, on your foreign income. So, in other words, you don't pay any taxes on the money you make outside Paraguay's borders. On the other hand, if you make money inside Paraguay, you will pay taxes, but you will only pay 10%. However, it's important to say too that you can basically deduct almost everything from that, from the taxes that you are paying, considerably reducing your final tax burden. And finally, if you were a company, there are several other strategies that you could follow, such as the Maquila law, that could reduce your taxes to pretty much zero. So yeah, I think we could say that Paraguay's tax system is indeed quite advantageous, right? Meanwhile, in Brazil, bureaucracy is a nightmare. And if you are a company, my friend, total taxes can consume 20%, 30%, sometimes 40% of your total revenue, okay? Depending on your regime. On normal people, such as myself, taxes can eat up 27% of your personal income, of the money that you make, with no returns whatsoever, okay? But public services continue to be horrible, even though the state has collected more money than ever in the past few years. Moving on, because we are still not done with Brazil's taxes, Brazil also taxes foreign investments at 15%, while Paraguay doesn't, let's recall that. Inheritances and donations are also taxed in Brazil at a rate of 2% to 8%, okay, while Paraguay doesn't tax these things. So yeah, I think Paraguay has a much more advantageous tax system when compared to Brazil. And just by saving in taxes, well, you can actually increase considerably your purchasing power. It's no wonder why so many Brazilians are moving to Paraguay. Now, our seventh key point are Paraguay's prices. You see, since taxes there are lower, prices can also be lower. For example, as we can see here, a MacBook can cost 150% more in Brazil than in Paraguay. Crazy, I know. And no, this number is not an invention, okay? I've just been to Paraguay and I've actually just bought a MacBook exactly because of this price difference. But for example, in Brazil, an iPhone also can cost more than twice than in Paraguay. Rent prices are also much cheaper in Paraguay too. You can get quality for a fair price, while in Brazil everything is super expensive, especially in the big cities, right? But yeah, the price differences are crazy. For example, a car in Paraguay can also cost half the price what it costs in Brazil. So yeah, prices in Paraguay can get Brazilians crazy. And the reason? Taxes. So yeah, it's no wonder, considering all these factors, that tens of thousands of Brazilians are actually crossing the border, right? And they're not alone. A growing number of Brazilian companies too are also making the same move. And finally, you see, it's not just the economic conditions that are attracting Brazilians to Paraguay. Safety is also playing a major role. For example, according to World Bank data, Brazil's homicide rate stood at roughly 19 per 100,000 inhabitants in 2023. In Paraguay, on the other hand, that figure was at just 7. Okay, that's a very big difference. And for many families, well, safety is just as important as the economy. So even in this regard, Paraguay is increasingly being viewed as a more attractive place to live than Brazil. So these were the 8 key points explaining why I believe Paraguay is outperforming Brazil. In my view, the differences between these two countries will only become more pronounced over the coming years and decades. And while in my view, Brazil will keep sinking, going down a path of higher taxation, bigger government, and slower growth, Paraguay will take that as an opportunity to grow, attracting Brazil's capital, businesses, and talent. And well, if that happens, I believe Paraguay could eventually surpass Brazil by a wide margin when it comes to quality of life over the long run. At least, that's my prediction. But of course, only time will tell, right? Anyway, that's it for today, and see you next time.